cross-examine, and we have a certain way we cross-examine back at home. It's called the chapter method. What we mean by that is that we take one topic of our cross-examination, we call it a chapter, kind of like a chapter in a book, and we develop questions about that chapter to bring out our theory of the case, which in this case is with these kind of answers, the magistrate's not being truthful. But we would bring out all the things around one chapter, and then we would move to our next chapter. We know the witness may not answer it the way we want, but we would argue to the judge then later what should be believed based on the cross. So I'm going to cross-examine using this chapter method. Learned magistrate, I'm going to first ask you some questions about the police bringing my client, Mr. Ramdeen, into your office. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in order for Mr. Ramdeen to come to your chambers, he had to be accompanied by the police officers, right?
Yes.
And the police officers brought him from the police station?
Yes.
And at the police station, he had been locked up in the jail cell in the back, right?
I don't know. I wasn't at the police station.
Well, you certainly know that the police don't just let people roam around the police station, right?
I would say that's not good public safety if they do that.
Because the accused was under arrest, Mr. Ramdeen was under arrest.
Yes.
And when the police bring him from the police station to your chambers, they're armed with guns, right?
Yes.
And then they have to take away their guns when they come into the courthouse?
Correct.
But they are still two police officers with a Mr. Ramdeen, and they bring him over. When they transport him, they make sure he cannot run away.
Correct.
They make sure he can't fight them, right? So he's handcuffed when they bring him over to the building.
Yes.
Now, when they came to your chambers, they took his handcuffs off, right?
Correct.
But Mr. Ramdeen was accused of a serious crime here, terrorism. Right?
Absolutely.
And that is a very serious crime in India that threatens the public welfare and public safety of all citizens of this nation.
Yes.
So certainly a terrorist suspect cannot be left alone in a room with a magistrate where they could attack, a terrorist could attack a magistrate, right?
If they wanted to, I suppose.
They could kill a magistrate, correct?
They could kill anyone.
And that is why when an accused who comes in with a very serious crime, such as terrorism or murder or rape, talks to a magistrate, a police officer comes in the room to make sure the magistrate will not be harmed.
Not in my office.
But that is the procedure that is generally used in the courthouse, correct?
I don't know what happens in other places. I just know what happens in my office.
Okay, so in your office, you claim that Mr. Ramdeen came in by himself, right?
Yes.
Now, at the time where you talked to him, Mr. Ramdeen was from Eastern India.
Yes.
And his native language was Bengali.
I thought it was another language. Assamese.
Assamese. Okay, now the language that you speak in your court is Hindi.
Yes.
And this is the language that is used by the litigants in your courtroom,
Yes.
by the witnesses in your courtroom.
Yes.
This is the language you listen to every day, right?
Yes.
And these other language, you studied this at some time in the past, correct?
I study it and use it frequently.
Because there are so many people who speak this particular language right here in New Delhi, correct?
We have many people who speak many languages here in New Delhi.
When you took the statement of my client, you wrote it out in Hindi.
No, I think I wrote it out in... Yeah,
Okay.
that one.
I'm going to show you what I previously marked as exhibit number 1. This is your handwriting, isn't it, learned magistrate?
Absolutely.
And this is your handwriting demonstrating the statement of the accused?
Yes.
And it is written in Hindi, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, after you took the statement in Hindi, you had to speak in this other language, but you had to take the statement in Hindi, correct?
Yes.
And at that point, you handed Mr. Ramdeen a pen and asked him to please sign this, correct?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Ramdeen, you determined had come from a small village,
Yes,
that he was not an educated man,
correct.
that he had not completed school,
He completed some school,
he did not have a high school degree,
correct.
he didn't even finish the 8th grade, did he learn in magistrate?
I don't recall what highest grade it was.
Okay, again, I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit number 1, and you made some notes on his educational level, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you noted that he had only gone through the 4th grade.
That is correct.
Thank you. Now, with this 4th grade education, he was able to sign his name?
Yes,
Okay. Now, I want to ask you some questions now about a different subject. I'm going to ask you specifically about the medical records. As I understand your testimony, you say that you observed the medical records.
correct.
And they were provided to you, correct?
Yes,
It was a summary. Yes? The medical records were a summary of his condition by the doctor.
yes.
And in this summary, you took a look, but you did not summon the doctor to ask him questions.
I did not speak to the doctor.
This is the required medical examination that the police do. It wasn't at this point asked for by a lawyer, correct?
Correct.
And at this point, the examination is confined to a physical examination of the person who the doctor examines.
Correct.
It is not a psychological examination at this point.
Correct.
So there had been no psychological testing of Mr. Ramdeen.
No,
Right?
no.
There were no observations made of his psychological condition.
Not that we noted in the summary.
And there was nothing in there regarding whether or not he had to take medication for a psychological condition.
Not that I recall.
There was nothing in there about whether he had post-traumatic stress.
Not sure why that would be relevant since it's only a physical summary, physical examination.
So we can agree that because it was a physical examination, not a mental examination, none of this had been inquired into.
Correct.
And based on that medical examination, you decided to go ahead and proceed.
Yes,
Now, when you questioned him, you said earlier that he told you he had been tortured, right?
yes,
That's your answer.
yes.
You said, were you tortured? And he said yes.
Yes, he still admitted to me that he did this.
Okay, and that's fine, but I have a few more questions I want to ask you first. When he told you that he had been tortured, you did not write this down in his statement that Mr. Ramdeen said he'd been tortured, did you?
No, because he wanted to confess to the fact that he is a terrorist.
And the torture that he said happened, you didn't ask him any details about it, right?
No, because he wanted to confess. He told me he was the torturer, the terrorist, and he did this.
Okay, so because he told you that he was a terrorist, because he told you that he did this, you did not ask any other questions about in what manner he was tortured.
Correct.
You didn't ask if he was beaten.
Correct.
You didn't ask if he had been deprived of food.
It wasn't relevant.
I understand that you feel that way. So your answer is yes, you didn't ask if he'd been deprived of
Now
food.
ask if he was.
You didn't ask if he'd been given enough water.
Correct.
You didn't ask whether or not the police had threatened to arrest his family.
No, I didn't ask.
You didn't ask whether or not the police had threatened to kill him.
I did not ask.
You didn't ask whether or not they had kept him up all night, night after night,
I did
and not allowed to sleep. You didn't ask whether or not they had made him sit or stand for long periods of time.
Correct.
You didn't ask whether they had deliberately made him be in an uncomfortable position.
Correct.
You didn't ask whether they had done certain kinds of torture that would not leave marks on a medical examination.
I asked him about whether he was a terrorist, and he said he was.
So you did not ask about whether they did things that would not leave marks on a medical examination. You did not ask whether or not they said they would take his children away,
Correct.
or that he would never work again.
Correct.
You just, because he said he wanted to give a confession to being a terrorist, even though he said he was tortured, you went ahead and you took the statement.
Correct.
And so you decided that because he said he wanted to do it, this must be a free and voluntary statement. That was your opinion, correct? Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you.